thank you so much to the Chamber for hosting our office. And I hope everyone had a happy 4th and are staying cool. And so, yes, I will start by introducing a bit more about the senator and the Senate district. I'm sure folks are aware of a lot of the biographical information about the senator, but I'll start with my slide deck. And so the moment of truth, we'll see if my screen sharing will work. Okay, so I think hopefully everyone sees my slides. But there are a lot of updates coming out from the state. You know, the legislature, the Senate and the Assembly are just starting their July recess now. So they'll be in summer recess for about a month. And we'll come back in August to send their last bills to the governor's desk for signing and to end session. And so I will start with a bit more about Senate District 15 and Senator Cortese. So Senator Cortese will represent Cupertino for the rest of this year. After redistricting, some of his West Valley portion of this district will end, and he'll start representing more of South County, which will be great. But you know, right now it's a really significant portion of Santa Clara County that he represents, everywhere from Cupertino to East Mount Hamilton, so including the cities of Cupertino, Los Gatos, Campbell, Saratoga, Montessorino, and San Jose communities of Willow Glen, Almaden, Evergreen, East San Jose, and downtown. And so some of that will be changing, but he's proud to represent this area for the rest of this year, and Cupertino will always be part of the Cortese and Senate District 15 family. And so the senator, I wanted to share a lot of his business background. You know, he's a really accomplished businessman, grew up in Santa Clara Valley when we saw great growth and expansion as the Valley of Heart's Delight. And so he grew up from a farm and comes from a family of farmers and ranchers. And so he has nearly 50 years of experience as a businessman. And so his first business was a hay and grain store that he ran when he was only 14 years old. And so that led him to becoming principal of his family farm, you know, wholesale retail, fruit and produce, a cattle ranch, along with other organizations. You know, he became investor and general manager for a professional sports franchise, a sports bar, a restaurant. He's also owns some real estate and commercial property across San Jose, and has been a stockholder at different startups, and has worked a lot across different business ventures. And so he brings that experience to his role. You know, he's found himself in the legislature at the middle and convergence of a lot of labor and business negotiations, whether it's safety on theatrical sets, you know, working with film production companies and also workers, whether it's looking at, you know, the airline industry and airline workers and meal and rest breaks to make sure that, you know, airline companies can continue to do their business. And so that's sort of where he likes to find himself, where, you know, business can continue to thrive while also uplifting workers. And so currently he was got a new leadership position in the Senate. He serves as Majority Whip. And so he serves in Senate leadership now, and also on the Transportation Committee, the Ethics Committee, the Education Committee, the Housing Committee. He's part of the California Transportation Commission, and it serves on the newly formed Senate Insurance Working Group, which I'm sure Cheryl is keeping an eye on that working group, looking at our insurance crisis in California. So that's a bit more about the senator and Senate District 15. And moving on. Now I will see if I can change my slides. Okay, there we go. So some highlights from this legislative session. So we will likely see at least two major bonds on the ballot. So a climate change bond of $10 billion to address climate change impacts. So that includes $3.8 billion for drinking water and groundwater upgrades, $1.5 million for $1 billion for wildfire and forest programs to mitigate fire risks, $1.2 billion to address sea level rise to protect our coasts and infrastructure, as well as a school facilities bond of $10 billion for school facility repairs, new construction, modernization, and that includes $8.5 billion for the K through 12 learning environments and $1.5 billion for community colleges. And so experts say this likely isn't enough, but as folks may remember, voters previously rejected a $15 billion bond in 2020. So it's been difficult to secure funding for school repairs. So both of those bonds will be on the ballot. We'll also see a public safety measure on the ballot, which I'll go a bit more deeper into in a future slide. And we will likely see a health insurance tax measure on the ballot. So this is regarding MCO, which I'm sure folks are aware of. And voters will decide whether or not to permanently dedicate money from the managed care organization tax to Medi-Cal. So the MCO tax is expected to generate up to $35 billion over 4 years. And so health providers argue those funds should be used to pay providers and to increase payments to healthcare providers. And so that will likely be on the ballot too. And so some new laws that are going into effect or are in effect as of January of this year. There is a law now on drink spiking prevention to make sure that bars and nightclubs provide test kits for customers to detect if their drinks have been drugged. There will also be more transparency in advertising. So advertisements for goods, services must now include all mandatory fees or charges to provide a bit more clarity around price information. There's a new law on renters' security deposits. So most California landlords, excluding smaller landlords, must limit security deposits to 1 month's rent in an effort to make it easier to secure housing. But at the same time, exempting smaller landlords with only 2 properties or less, or with no more than 4 units. There is also a new law in effect on maintaining workplace violence prevention plans, including additional training, responding to reports of violence, increased violence, especially in the retail space, again, excluding some smaller businesses. And we'll again talk more about public safety in a future slide. But those are some of the highlighted bills that I thought folks would find interesting. There's a lot more, but I'll leave it at that for now. Then wanted to transition into some highlights from the senator's office. And so you can see in the photo here, the recent announcement on the Eastridge to BART regional connector, which the senator has been advocating for over 2 decades, to link San Jose to BART. So this was a long awaited achievement. And in Sacramento, in the legislative space, one of his key bills, and I wanted to highlight this in terms of affecting local governments, has been around autonomous vehicles and regulating autonomous vehicles, including those that will be operated by AI. And so currently only the DMV can issue and revoke permits for AV companies. And I'm sure you've heard about in the news that happening. And so this bill would allow local governments to revoke or issue permits rather than, it's advocating for the need for local control around AVs while supporting technical advancement. And so this bill, the senator has announced he will likely reintroduce. It didn't, there were concerns during committee and some amendments made that gutted the bill a bit. So he'll likely be reintroducing this bill, but I thought it was worth at the local level highlighting. And some other bills in the education space. So the senator has been a champion for guaranteed income. If folks have been following that path, he helped launch a guaranteed income program for transition age foster youth a few years ago back at the county. And so he's been bringing that statewide. And so he really pushed for the state's first investment in guaranteed income, which are unconditional cash payments, to sort of get away from overly prescribed safety net systems. And so SB 333 would grant $1,000 per month for the transition from high school to higher education for unhoused 12th grade seniors. So students that fall under McKinney-Vento would be eligible. And so this is, believe it or not, that's 15,000 unhoused 12th grade students that would be eligible for the state of California, which is a very scary statistic, but that is the state that we're in. And so this bill is still going through the process. And so the state superintendent has now come on as a sponsor of the bill as well, Tony Thurmond. And so that bill is starting as a district pilot with the support of Supervisor Susan Ellenberg at the county level to provide monthly stipends for unhoused high school seniors as they transition into adulthood. Another bill I wanted to highlight, SB 483. So if you're like me, you weren't aware of what the term prone restraint meant, but in terms of school settings, but prone restraint is the face down restraint of students. It's known to be an antiquated form of, a punitive measure at school campuses. And so it does still exist, although it's been rejected by the federal Department of Education. They recommend banning prone restraint now that we have other forms of de-escalation and positive behavioral health intervention. And so over half of the states in our country have banned prone restraint. And so we think that California will be next. And so this bill is getting a lot of support, especially since prone restraint is something that affects, students with disabilities more. And it's even led to, and this sort of started the resurgence of the conversation, but it's led to not only injury, but death of students. And so the office has been working with the family of Max Benson, who was a 13-year-old autistic student that died after being restrained face down. So this has been a very powerful bill, and it's been receiving a lot of powerful testimony as well. And so that bill is moving forward. And then also in the K through 12 schools facility space, SB 956 has also passed Assembly Policy Committee. And so it's a bill that would save California taxpayers millions of dollars when it comes to school construction by making designed builds in the K through 12 space permanent law. So it's a form of construction that streamlines the process by combining design and construction phases. So would allow school boards to, modernize their facilities in a more efficient, cost-effective manner. So we're excited about that bill as well. So I'm sure the budget and our budget deficit is on everyone's mind. So I thought I'd give some updates as the governors just a few days ago signed the state budget. And so business, well, folks don't always realize that our largest form of revenue for the state isn't property tax, but it's income tax. And so we have seen, obviously, our budget be a bit volatile because of IPOs, of capital gains. And so that's why it's important to make sure our businesses are thriving. It actually really affects our state revenue. And so the state budget is now approved, and there are a lot of highlights I want to give. And so, as I'm sure you're aware, there was a $46.8 billion shortfall. And so the budget sees reductions in $16 billion. We've managed to maintain $22.2 billion in total reserves to help us make sure we're financially stable, because I, again, mentioned revenue fluctuations. And so some of the key components in the budget, Prop 98 saw a very slight COLA, but, we've maintained Prop 98. We'll see a Medi-Cal expansion and some updated rates for our most vulnerable populations. We see more funding around public safety. We are continuing to invest in homelessness, which I'll talk a bit more about in a future slide. And so we've set aside record amounts for reserves and sort of focused in our one-time spending. And so across nearly all state departments, we'll face a 7.95% funding reduction. So that in itself will save us $3.7 billion. And it's through the elimination of thousands of vacant positions across state departments. We'll see an additional cut of $385 million from corrections and rehabilitation. A $1.1 billion reduction around affordable housing, reduction of $746 million around healthcare workforce, $500 million reduction around student housing. And so we'll see delays across other programs too. I sort of feel depressed going through all these reductions, but sharing the latest information with you. And so even delays in over $3 billion in funding for food benefits and more. And so I'm happy to share more about the budget, but those are some of the highlights. The legislature will also be looking at a bill in August to require a portion of future surpluses be set aside to sort of grow our state's main reserve account. Those are, there were different, concessions with labor as well, around delays in, for instance, the healthcare wage benefit, minimum wage increase, I should say, which will be delayed at least until this October. And, other concessions were made to balance our budget. So wanted to highlight public safety. I know safety is a top concern for folks in our district and the state. And, if you look at all the numbers, retail theft is on the rise for our county, for the Bay Area as a whole. And so we'll highlight a plan of bills that the legislature is moving forward. And also highlight some bills like SB 908 and SB 10 that are authored by Senator Cortese to fight our fentanyl crisis, especially among our youth. And folks may be aware our fentanyl crisis is responsible for 1 in 5 youth deaths in the Bay Area. And so SB 10 is now law. It was signed into law last year to mandate that schools update their school safety plans to provide training for staff around administering opioid antagonists, also known as naloxone or the name brand Narcan. The office was able to work with our governor to get funding in our budget for all middle schools and high schools to have Narcan at their school campus, or naloxone, I should say. And to build on that, the senators authoring this year SB 908, which would require the Department of Health to monitor trends for fentanyl-related deaths among children 0 to 5. And I'm sure folks have read some of the cases we've seen on the news, even locally. So it would require annual reporting to local public health departments, to counties, and the legislature. And so lastly, wanted to highlight the package of public safety bills that are moving through the legislature. And so there are 14 bills, but I will summarize a lot of them, and happy to speak more on any of them. And so the hope is to expand access to treatment for those struggling with substance use disorders, to enhance services within the criminal justice system to better address substance use, to again fight fentanyl, and to lastly combat retail theft. And so some of the bills are like, I will just go through a few of them. Will expedite approvals for projects that expand rehab facilities, substance use disorder rehab facilities. Will empower the state to approve testing and health assessment equipment, to increase fentanyl testing strips, to help individuals detect fentanyl contamination, to allow practitioners to dispense a 3-day supply of narcotic medication to help with detoxification, to help address our physician shortages in underserved areas, including to incentivize doctors to work in areas that need them more, including through loan repayment options for doctors, to expand the number of reentry hubs for treatment options for individuals. There's also a bill from Senator Ashby to prevent the use of animal tranquilizers that are increasingly found in illicit drug supplies. And then wanted to touch on some of our retail theft bills, to require third-party sellers to be certified, to increase guardrails around the online marketplace, to increase penalties for organized retail theft, to make it easier for law enforcement to access information when there's repeated theft across different retail locations, for instance, to impose higher penalties for those that create fires to engage in retail theft, to address the locked door loophole when it comes to automotive property thefts. So this is when currently, to convict someone of auto burglary, prosecutors must prove that the vehicle was locked at the time of the break-in. And so this is a requirement that would be removed that, often hampers prosecutors, and so much more. And so that package of bills coming out of the Senate is called the Safer California Plan. And so happy to share more information on all of those bills. It's a package of 14 bills, and to, combat retail theft. And folks may know there will be on the ballot an initiative to amend Prop 47. And so this would allow district attorneys to charge people with a felony on a third offense of a drug possession, or for thefts of less than $950, and would also allow for harsher penalties for people who traffic fentanyl. And so there were some competing public safety ballot initiatives in the legislature, but so far that's going to be headed to the ballot. And I will go on to my last slide here. I thought I'd highlight some small business highlights, and then move on to homelessness as well. So California has more than 4.1 million small businesses. So they are the fabric of our economy, and they create 2/3 of all new jobs, employ over 7 million people, which is nearly half of the state's private sector workforce. And they make up over 98% of all businesses in the state. And so I know that the state legislature wants to lead when it comes to new business startups. And so business attracts more than half of all venture capital investments in the country. And that totals over $104 billion in 2022 alone. And so we've recently received over $1.1 billion from the US Department of Treasury for the Small Business Credit Initiative to support our small business. We recently received an additional $26.3 million to launch a new program called the Technical Assistance for Capital Readiness Program to help small business understand and navigate their funding landscape. We have a California small business loan match. And so we also have a state goal to spend at least 25% of our procurement budget on small businesses. And so, we hope to support our emerging tech sectors and continue to create high quality jobs throughout the state. Folks may know we have a very ambitious target in terms of state apprenticeships, and the governor had a goal of 500,000 new apprenticeships by 2030. And so those would be around healthcare, infrastructure, construction, and technology. And so lastly, wanted to highlight homelessness. I think along with safety is a top concern that comes up across the district. I believe our homelessness count is 180,000 across California. And, this governor's really made funding homelessness a priority. It hasn't quite translated with reducing that count, and so Senator Cortese authored a state audit on homelessness through his role on the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. So it looks at some state programs along with the city of San Jose and San Diego as well. And so folks may know the state, and in our line item in our budget, we've invested $24 billion over 30 programs over the past 5 years. And so the audit gathered as much data as it could and analyzed spending from the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And I would encourage folks to look into this more. It revealed a lot in terms of our funding and how the state needs to do more to track our funding, to make sure that we're delivering measurable outcomes in terms of homelessness. So the audit the findings are still in their initial phases, and there will continue to be updates from the audit. But initial updates found that there are gaps in terms of tracking funding. So it found programs like Home Key and a couple other programs were cost effective. And Home Key is the state program to convert hotels and motels to transitional housing for our unhoused. But it also found that, for instance, in San Jose, cities failed to thoroughly account for their spending or measure the successes of their program, whether funding was directly going to housing individuals. And so, it is definitely a cause for concern, but will lead to some actions moving forward through the audit around enhanced data collection, around investing with more oversight. And so the senator is continuing to speak on this audit through his district events and at the statewide level. And so I do think that there will be more stringent oversight and accountability to come when it comes to this type of spending. So those were some of the highlights from the legislature and the Senate District 15 office. And with that, I'll leave our contact information here and happy to answer any questions. And certainly there are a lot more legislative and policy and budget highlights from the state, but those were some that I think are on folks' mind right now. And, you know, we're always here to serve you from the Senate District 15 office. Even after Cupertino's redistricted out, we will still be part of your family. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it back to Deb.
Thanks, Tara. That was very informative. I do have a question, and of course it's going to be towards the small business piece. It's encouraging that the senator continues to focus on small businesses, because we know that 2024 is kind of the pivot year coming out of 3 years of pandemic, and hopefully going more towards recovery. We do see some recovery, but certainly not at the pre-pandemic levels, and that's what we're striving for, right?
Yeah.
So my question for you and the senator is, as we continue to recover, do you foresee any opportunity for our small businesses to get additional support? And I mean support in terms of either funding in terms of more grants, or more support in terms of, say, resources that would, say, help bring more attention to small businesses, that would increase their business bases, or more attention towards small businesses in 2025 and 2026, as we start to hopefully pull the small businesses more towards increased, I'll say increased businesses and revenues in those years?
Absolutely. You know, I think that one of the things I thought we actually could invest more in our budget, I know it's a difficult time, is small business. You know, we heard positive responses as a whole from our, you know, COVID-19 grants, but the only negative was that, you know, there were too many applications, right? And the need was far greater than the funding, right? So personally, I think that was actually one big thing that we were missing from our budget in terms of investing in small business. And as I mentioned, the highlights, it's a big driver of our economy and thus our state budget. So it could actually help us get out of this deficit and help us, you know, stay a bit more balanced in that sense. So I do think there's more we can do. You know, my senator, as you heard, his small business background, has been a big champion for, you know, measures coming out of Sacramento, making sure that they're not unfairly targeting small business, you know, making sure we're making exemptions. You know, a big debate that was going to go to the ballot was PAGA, right? And so I hope I'm not speaking out of term when I say that he thinks that there should be exclusions for small businesses when it comes to things like, you know, PAGA, right? And so I'm sure he would agree that there can be more in terms of tax incentives, in terms of loan assistance, in terms of grants. And so I couldn't stress more that it's directly tied to our state revenue as a whole, especially as a driver of economy here in Senate District 15 and California as an engine for our country, right? And so I know that one thing the state's trying to do is leverage enough federal funding, right? But in terms of our budget, I thought there was a lot of good, but I do think that I don't think we invested enough in small business. I'm probably just speaking personally when I say that, but certainly there's more we can do. And, you know, some members of our office are actually on a little small business tour, you know, touring small businesses I was able to visit a small business a couple days ago that was, minority women owned. And so we were actually chatting about, different services that could be provided to minority owned businesses and women owned businesses to make sure that they know the landscape well, they know the guidelines for starting up their small business. And so I think there's certainly more we can do. I know you just had Dennis King as a guest speaker. So the senator was back at the county, a big part of launching the Small Business Development Center. And boy, as when speaking from when I worked with him at the county, we worked in partnership with SBDC every day during the pandemic. And so they saved the lives of so many small business owners. And so programs like that across the state are essential for sure.
Well, thank you for saying that, because oftentimes we hear a lot about things, and we do have a raised hand that I'll go to next. We hear about, minimum wage going up. We hear about the cost of groceries going up. And, Cupertino has a lot of restaurants and small businesses that are related to food service and the hospitality industry, as well as other small businesses. And those costs rising kind of eat into their margins. So the help on the other side is just even more paramount as we continue to recover. And I just think people have forgotten that we're still in a pivot year. We're still recovering. So I'm going to call on Ryan Goltz. He's one of our board members and vice president of finance for our board, and lower his hand. Ryan, over to you for a question.
Hi, Tara. I know that you mentioned the audit for the unhoused. Obviously, with the Supreme Court justice coming back with their decision for the state of Oregon on how they were dealing with their unhoused, we have a lady that's currently got an encampment over by Target, and I had reached out to the city, and I'm just curious if you know of any changes now that the Supreme Court has ruled on that, of where we can possibly either update our rules since they have given the jurisdiction back to our cities and counties, and also if that's not the case, if we can look at rehousing her to a different location.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put my personal number and contact in the chat because I'd love to help you personally on that specific case. So, we are aware of what the decision from Oregon. And so I think that the senator, wants to be very careful in terms of, we don't want to send homeless people to jail, right? I think that's where the senator's coming from, but we want to get them off the streets into transitional housing as a first priority. I think that, sending them to the prison systems should probably be a last resort, right? So obviously aware of Prop 1, right? Investing in more mental health treatment beds. And so the senator co-chaired Measure A for Santa Clara County. But one thing that he found was that measure didn't invest enough in transitional housing, in short-term beds, right? And so I think the senator's approach is get folks off the street into short-term transitional housing, then into permanent supportive housing with mental health, addiction treatment, job transition programs. And so I will leave my personal contact to help with that specific case. I mean, it's really difficult because obviously we don't have enough transitional housing right now, and it has been something that I've personally heard from business owners of how it can affect their business, right? And I think we also all just want to give these people help. And so, and it's a much larger issue, right? And so for me, I work very much in the education space. So I say it all comes back to early learning and childcare and making sure that we set our youngest people up from the start so they don't, end up in those types of situations. But I will keep you posted. I think that the senator's major concern is making sure we're getting our fair share in terms of Prop 1. I also mentioned, guaranteed income for unhoused students so they don't end up on the street, right? But I would personally want to help you with that specific case. So I'm going to leave my contact information in the chat.
You're gonna put that in the chat. Okay, Tara, thank you so much. We have another raised hand. Luis Bueller.
Yes, you mentioned public safety. Obviously, public safety and retail theft is a big issue for the business community. And I wondered, we now have Prop 36 on the ballot, which you talked about. Does the senator support that one? But you are, I'm sure, aware that there were extensive efforts in the legislature to try and derail that initiative. And I'm just curious, what is it about that initiative that caused so much resistance in Sacramento?
Yeah, and so I guess the competing measure was pulled just 2 days ago, right? I'm sure you're aware. And so I actually don't know where the senator stands now that that was pulled. I will be honest with you. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but I don't know if he's made a public position yet, because there were a lot of policies to review from the competing initiatives. And now, as of 2 days ago, there's one initiative. So I'm not sure where he's going to go. But in terms of the resistance, I think it just comes down to, I can certainly speak for the legislature when I say they want to crack down on retail theft. It's on the rise in our county, especially, it's on the rise in high populous areas, as you can imagine. And so I think there was probably hesitance on a lot of issues, including this one, to make those reforms on the ballot. It doesn't always work out as you want when things go to the ballot. And so I think that the legislature always prefers to work things out through legislation, if that makes sense. And so, but I certainly know that the legislature does want to, increase penalties for retail theft, right? And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, but I think that was the major concern. I mean, I don't think, also, no one wants, my 10-year-old nephew who steals a candy bar to end up in San Quentin with the murder, right? Like, no one wants that too. So could be a bit of that as well. And so I think that, they just prefer to work through legislation rather than the ballot. So.
Are there, I don't see any more raised hands, so I'm going back to everybody. Any more questions for Tara? Tara, just a follow-up comment on the homelessness situation, just because as city manager, we have experience dealing with the homeless encampment on Wolf Road. And the answer is we need more resources going towards mental and behavioral health.
Mm-hmm.
The base for homelessness, because it doesn't matter if you think it's addiction related or not. If you just treat that portion of it, it will help with the majority of the situations, at least from my personal experience.
It's a vicious cycle,
And it's just a matter of where you catch that cycle. It's still resources, lots of resources. So
yeah.
Are there any questions from anybody else on the Zoom for Tara? Okay, Mahesh has a question in the chat.
Sharing the slides, yes. And Mahesh Uncle, I'm happy to give you a one-on-one of my presentation. And I can share the slides to Deb, and perhaps she can.
Yeah.
I can just email it to you too.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was very good, informational. Sorry I joined a little bit late, but it was awesome. Good to see you there.
We'll get a coffee and I'll.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Anybody else? Oh, we have some raised hands now. Okay, so I'm going to go to Marianne Shavlin.
Tara, I'm wondering, the state audit report on the homelessness issue, when would that be available and how can we get a copy of that?
Yeah, so initial findings are available. And so I can email that to you specifically. We have a state JLAC, it's called, website, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee website. It's a bit hard to maneuver, so I can send you whatever's public currently. And we have our newsletter where we've been sharing, we'll do regular updates on the audit. The senator, it's something that's a top priority for him. He asked for the audit, about a year ago now, I want to say, and it's something that the community is very much on board with, because I think that they also want to know where their taxpayer dollars are going. So,
Okay, thank you.
We have another raised hand. Luis?
Yes, I have another initiative-related question. There have been some bills that want to make it more difficult for people to gather signatures to put initiatives on the ballot, and this is something that the business community has used on a regular basis to put issues in front of voters that are important to them. I'm curious if the senator and or you have a position on outlawing signature, payments per signature to put initiatives on the ballot.
so outlawing hiring paid signature gatherers is the question.
I believe that's the bill that has been advanced. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that the senator wants to make sure it's not like easier to repeal something than it is to pass it. You want to make sure the signature threshold is fair. And so in terms of paid signature gatherers, I would have to ask him and get back to you. I think that just knowing the senator and probably giving my 2 cents too, we just want to make sure that it was clear who's paying for this. He's been a big supporter of the Disclose Act for the mailers that I'm sure you get a barrage of those. And I think he's supportive, and I know I am, of making it even clearer who's paying for what. And so I think that he does support those transparency reforms on who's paying for what. Now, people are paid for staff for campaigns all the time. So, I don't think that he'd want to make that illegal, but there should certainly be transparency on, large donations for any type of campaign, right? If that makes sense. So, but would love to hear your thoughts too, or if there's a certain specific example you'd like to share.
Well, Evan Lowe has a bill to outlaw payments per signature for people who are getting signatures for initiatives. And this is what the business community uses to put issues on the ballot.
Yeah, well, I can check in with the senator on that specific bill and see if he has made up his mind either way, but certainly he's all about transparency for any sort of big donations for me, whatnot. But people are paid to campaign. It's when the senator ran his campaign, he had paid staff. You don't want to have, you don't want to abuse people. So let me check in on that and get back to you.
Thank you.
So anybody who's interested, Tara has put her contact information in the chat. Tara Srikrishnan@gmail.com is for her email address. Her phone number is 408-480-7833. And so if you want to contact her for some specific report or an answer you're looking for on a specific issue that she's spoken about here, please feel free to do so. Right, Tara?
Yes, and I will ask Luis for his email so I can get back to him if they want to put that in the chat. I have Marianne in my head.
It's almost 1:30. Anybody else have any questions for Tara?
Yeah, I had one, but we can do it offline, Tara. A lot of Gen Zs are asking me about SB 1047. It's about the AI Model Act. You can research it, and we will talk offline on that. I would love to get your opinion on that.
Perfect. Will do. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, for giving us some information. Anybody else? One last call for any questions here.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody stay cool out there. It's getting hotter, I think. I'm getting hot. The chamber offices does not have good HVAC, just FYI.
Oh, gosh.
Anyway, enjoy your weekend, and we will talk at some of you on Monday. And take care. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you so much for organizing that, Deb.
Yep, no problem. See you later. Bye-bye.
See you.